Hi everyone, this is Mr. Morrow. I am going to show you how to make optimal profiles for a few of the FPGA cores for the Analogue Pocket using the RetroTINK-4K. If you didn't know, the RetroTINK-4K is an advanced scaler, so it is highly recommended that you familiarize yourself with all of the instructions on the RetroTINK-4K wiki, and I'm going to use a few of the menu options to make optimal profiles for the RetroTINK-4K. Now, you don't have to actually make these profiles. These profiles are included on the unit or will be included on the unit in the future if you haven't gotten them yet. And in the Analogue Pocket, they will be under Analogue Pocket profiles, and you can see the various different profiles here. I'm going to go over today a few consoles, such as the Sega Genesis, the the Sega Genesis, Nintendo NES, TurboGrafx, and Super NES, or the TurboGrafx or PCEngine CD. And so I can go ahead and start with that. You do need your Analogue Pocket to be updated to firmware 2.0. As firmware 2.0 unlocks integer scaling for the unit. So make sure, and that was released on December 23rd of 2023. Make sure that you are on that unit. Just so that you're aware, these instructions may become obsolete when DAC support is included for the Analogue Pocket, or the Analogue Pocket is updated to include DAC support. But for now, we just have to make do with the different scaling features that are available to us on the RetroTINK-4K. So once you have everything connected, let's go ahead into the Open FPGA option. Let's go to console, and let's go to our first console, the Genesis. This is going to use the spiritualized core. I am unable to use the Eric Lewis core for whatever reason. It freezes up on me whenever I try to reach into its settings. So let's go ahead and move forward with the Eric Lewis. And let's start with the Sonic and Knuckles in Sonic 3, because this is going to have a very common 320 by 224 resolution used on the Sega Genesis. So before we do anything else, let's start a new game so that we get something nice and clear. Now this looks really nice. If you just plug the unit into the RetroTINK-4K and just start playing, it does look very nice. However, you are mixing scaling. You do have the Analogue Pocket scaling to fit the screen, while to 1080p, and then you have the RetroTINK-4K scaling 1080p to 4K. And so the reason we're making these optimal profiles is so that only one thing really does the scaling at a time. And just so that you also know, as something that you can think about, is if you would like to use the CRT filters for the RetroTINK on the RetroTINK-4K, if you want to use CRT filters from the Analogue Pocket, you do have to leave it in the default mode, because if you were to load one of the Genesis profiles, using that, nothing would look correct. It would look very weird and very messed up. This is actually a pretty cool effect, but this is not what we are looking for. So let's go ahead and load the default profile and set up our Analogue Pocket for success. Let's hold the home button and press left until we reach the normal filter, which is noted below. And then next, we are going to hit the analog button, go down to core settings, display mode, mode settings, size, and then change the option to integer. And this gives us a perfect 4x integer scale in both the horizontal and the vertical for all Genesis games. And we do need to keep this 4x in our mind as we continue on with some settings. So the first thing we want to do is go to the remote on the top, hit the ADC button. And this is going to take us to our HDMI receiver setup. And the first thing you want to do is go to input pixels under input decimation and increase that until you hit 4, because as I mentioned, this is a 4 times integer scale of a Sega Genesis. Then you want to hit the scale button on the top of the remote, and that is going to take us to the scaling crop setup on the RetroTINK-4K. Let's make our way down to vertical prescale, and then increase that until we hit 1/4. Let's go make our way down to the scaler. Under scaling mode, you want to hit auto fill integer. And that is because as we do the next bit, it is going to keep our image relatively the same size so that it is easy to see what it is that we need to do. So just so that you're aware, we are going to use the input crops to hone in on the image for the Sega Genesis. And so we are going to decrease the top, bottom, left, and right trims until we hit the border of the picture. And as you can see, we have hit the 320 by 224 resolution of most Sega Genesis games. This means that when we are manipulating this image, it is perfectly integer scaled 4 times with square integer pixels. However, if you would like to use take the pixel aspect ratio in mind, let's go ahead, hit the scale button one more time, go down to scaling mode as I've done here, and then we're going to find the freeform. And what we can do is adjust the vertical factor until it is a perfect integer scale of 9. And then adjust the horizontal factor until it hits the pixel aspect ratio width for this type of game, which is going to be 2633 or 2634. And this is going to be essentially what the Sega Genesis would look like on a CRT without any of the masks or filters on it. At this point, you can go into the SFX menu and adjust it whichever way you would like. However, at this point, we're done and we don't need to do any more. Now, this is for a perfect 9 times integer scale. You might want to adjust that in the menu for a perfect 10 times integer scale if you would like. Now, here is the one problem with doing things this way. When you open the menu, everything is going to be cropped and nothing may look correct, and that's okay. You can always just hit the profile button, load the default profile, and the menu is back where it needs to be. So we're done with the Sega Genesis 320 core. Let's go ahead and Genesis core, taking a look at games that are 320 by 224. Let's take a look at the NES next. And we're going to go ahead and try Super Mario Bros. 2 because this is going to show us a quirk of the NES. And as you can see, this is the default profile in the RetroTINK-4K. So what we're going to do is press the analog button, go down to core settings, go down to display mode, mode settings, size, and then hit integer. This is going to make sure that everything is a 4 times integer scale of the 240p the RetroTINK, the Analogue Pocket gives. So let's go back. And now that we're here, go to the top of the remote and hit the ADC button. Again, we're going to reach the HDMI receiver setup menu. We know that this is a 4 times scale in all directions, so we want to increase input pixels to 4, and then hit the scale button on the top of the remote. This is going to get us to the scaling crop setup. Let's go down to vertical prescale and hit 4 because it is a 4 times vertical scale. Let's go down to scaling mode and hit auto fill integer, because that is going to make sure that our image stays stable as we crop the picture. And now that we're here, we're going to crop the top, bottom, left, and right. until we get the crop that we need. And when we go down, as we can see, the NES is going to show us the 256 by 240 scale, and that is scaled 9 times in all directions to fit 4K. Now, if you would like, the top and bottom, you can trim a little more. So it is 23 on each side. You do not really lose any important information on the top and bottom trims, but if you would like to keep that, that is up to you. Finally, if we want to include display aspect ratio size in any way, we can go down to scaling mode and hit freeform and adjust it until we get a vertical scaling factor of 9. And then we're going to adjust the horizontal factor to something that is more akin to what a CRT is going to display for a 9 times scale playing NES. In this case, it would be 2634, but you can use anything you want with freeform. This is just a general guide. So now that we've reached this point, we don't have to do anything else. We can go ahead and quit. And we can also load the default profile to move on to the next console. Okay, the next console I do want to look at is going to be the PCEngine CD. And I'm going to use Castlevania Symphony of the Night. It's a pretty simple game that we can pause. Okay, so now that we're here and we've started, same thing, the Analogue Pocket will scale the image to 1080p, and then the RetroTINK scales the image further to 4K, but what we want is an integer scale. I'm not sure if you see it here, but things are a little soft, so we can do a little better. Let's go ahead and hit the home button, open core settings, open display mode, mode settings, size, and then change that to integer. Let's go back. This should be a perfect 4 times scale in all directions. But why don't we go ahead and confirm that, because I have a sneaking suspicion that it may be a little different. So let's go ahead and hit the scale button to start. Go down to scaling mode and change that to autofill integer. This is going to keep the image relatively stable while at the same size while we crop the picture until we hit the edges of the game. Great. And then we're going to crop the left and right side of the image until we hit the edge of the game. Okay, so as you can see, the image gives us 1275 by 894. 1275 is actually missing 5 pixels. I'm not sure why, but the image is supposed to be 256 by 224. So when you do 256 times 5, that's supposed to be 1280. So let's adjust the right trim, 5, and that's going to give us our perfect 1280 by 892. So it is a 5 times scale on the horizontal and a 4 times scale on the vertical. We're going to keep that in mind, but before we do that, hit the profile button, load default, and you are going to see why we did that in a moment, because when we hit the ADC button on the top of the remote, it takes us to the HDMI receiver setup, and we want to increase input pixels to 5 because it is a 5 times scale on the horizontal. Next thing you want to do is select the scale button, go down to vertical prescale and increase that to 4 because it is only a 4 times scale in the vertical. And as you can see, we are getting pretty close to what we need this image to be. So let's go ahead and switch scaling mode to autofill integer so that we can do our crops without the image scaling up and down so much. Let's start by decreasing the top trim, decreasing the bottom trim, decreasing the left trim, and then decreasing the right trim. Okay, so as you can see, we've hit the 256 by 224 resolution for any TurboGrafx CD game. If you are actually using something that was 512, you would use different math, but in this case, I'm using this one for Castlevania Symphony of the Night. We are done here. And this is basically as sharp as it gets for PCEngine CD. Let's hit our final console. So we quit the Analogue Pocket core. Let's go ahead and load the default profile in the RetroTINK-4K. And the final core we're going to take a look at is going to be the Super NES. Let's go ahead and use, what have I used before? I think it's best to use Super Mario World. That's fine. And let's get to a point where we can pause the game. Great, we're here. Just like all the other cores I've shown you before, the Analogue Pocket wants to scale it to the full screen for the HDMI menu. Sorry, for the full screen for 1080p. What we want is integer scaling. So what we are going to do is press the analog button, go down to core settings, hit display mode, mode settings, size, and then integer. This is going to give us a 4 times scale in all directions. For this, looks a little skinny, but let's see what we can do. Like this is what a perfect square integer scale looks like for this. Let's go ahead and hit the ADC button on the remote. Go down to input pixels and increase that by 4. Press the scale button, go down to vertical prescale and increase that to 1/4. Let's go down to scaling mode, change that to autofill integer. And we're doing that so that it stays relatively the same size to the screen. So what we're going to do now is decrease the top, bottom, left, and right trims until we hit the edges of the game. Now that we've done that, you can see we have a perfect 256 by 224 scale of what we're using, and that is exactly the resolution the Super Nintendo puts out. You want to go back to scaling mode and switch that over to freeform. And let's go ahead and switch this to a 9 times vertical scale. And let's change the horizontal scale to match the display aspect ratio. So we would go from 250, from whatever the output is, to 2634. And this is essentially the way a Super Nintendo game would look on a CRT. And we would be done with everything. However, the PCEngine CD as well as the Super Nintendo do output 512 horizontal for 240p. So I think it would be great to show you what you would do in case you run into a game that does actually output that. So let's go into core settings, load cartridge, and let's see if Secret of Mana is here. It should be, yes. So Secret of Mana has a quirk where any menu that it loads will actually be, so any normal gameplay is in 256, as you're going to see here. However, any menu is actually going to be in 512. In this case, things don't look correct. Things don't look correct here. So you want to use actually a quirk of the RetroTINK. You want to either decrease input pixels to 2, and that will decrease the amount that it scales. You have a 2 times scale of 512 rather than a 4 times scale of 256. You can, if you wanted to, also increase output pixels to 2. That will also double this, and as you can see, it does look much sharper than before. Sorry. So this is what it looks like previously, and then when you increase this to 2, this is what it looks like. And as we're going to go ahead and adjust the trims on the left and the right. And what that's going to do is it is going to show us that rather than doing what we were doing before, it is a perfect 512 by 224. It's going to be the same thing for the PCEngine CD. I would rather you increase output pixels to 2 than try to futz around with the input pixels, because this is essentially how that is going to work. And that covers the consoles some consoles that the Analogue Pocket can run, and adjusting them and optimizing them so that it reaches display aspect ratio and you have optimal profiles to start making your effects with as well. Thank you so much. Have a good night.